What should we do now is what we should be talking about. Not all this politicking, spreading money around, being silly with our future. Indeed. The same thing I spoke on just a minute. I spoke on this program some years ago when an Al-Qaeda member was appointed a federal minister in Nigeria. And I remember I said it publicly because we are living sacrifices. Why is that happening in a nation? And why are we pretending?
Indeed, Reverend Thompson.
Let's dig deeper into the pattern of persecution, because this isn't just about numbers. It's about a systematic campaign that has been escalating for years. Exactly. And what's particularly disturbing is how the violence is carried out. These aren't random acts. They're coordinated military-style operations. Boko Haram and Fulani militants attack with precision, targeting Christian communities specifically. Right. And the timing is often deliberate. Attacks happen during church services, on Christian holidays, when communities are most vulnerable. It's psychological warfare as much as physical violence, and the Nigerian military's response is inadequate, to say the least. That's putting it mildly. There are documented cases where Christian villages have called for help during attacks, and the military either arrives hours too late or doesn't come at all. Yet when there's a threat to government installations or Muslim-majority areas, the response is swift. It's a double standard that costs Christian lives. And this is exactly what President Trump identified. He saw that the Nigerian government wasn't just failing to protect Christians, it was actively choosing not to. That's the key insight. And it's why his CPC designation was so important. It called out the government's complicity, not just the terrorist actions. Now, let's talk about the international response, or lack thereof. Where is the rest of the world while this genocide unfolds? That's the most frustrating part. The United Nations has been virtually silent. The European Union issues occasional statements of concern but takes no concrete action. Even the British government, which has a former colonial relationship with Nigeria and whose citizen, Nnamdi Kanu, is being detained, has done almost nothing. It's a moral failure of epic proportions. And it highlights why President Trump's leadership is so crucial. He's willing to act when others won't. He's willing to use American power to defend the defenseless. That's real leadership. Let's also talk about the economic leverage that President Trump is using. He threatened to cut U.S. aid to Nigeria. How significant is that? It's hugely significant. Nigeria receives hundreds of millions of dollars in American assistance annually. A lot of that money goes to security and development programs. By threatening to cut that aid, Trump is hitting the Tinubu administration where it hurts. And it's the right approach. Why should American taxpayers fund a government that tolerates genocide? It's not just morally wrong, it's fiscally irresponsible. Exactly. And this is where Trump's America First policy shows its strength. It's not isolationist, it's about using American resources strategically to advance American values. If Nigeria wants our money, they need to respect human rights. It's that simple. Now, I want to go back to Nnamdi Kanu's case because there's an aspect we haven't fully explored, his support for Israel. In a region where anti-Israel sentiment is widespread, Kanu has been a vocal supporter of the Jewish state. The Igbo people have this fascinating historical claim of connection to the Jewish people, and Kanu has embraced that identity. He's spoken about it publicly, he's visited Israel, and he's made it part of the Biafran independence movement. And that makes him a target not just of the Nigerian government, but of broader anti-Israel forces in the region and globally. Absolutely. His imprisonment sends a message: if you support Israel in Africa, you will be punished. And President Trump, by condemning the Tinubu administration, is also defending Israel's allies. He's saying America stands with those who stand with Israel. That's a powerful statement. It's also worth noting that Kanu holds British citizenship. His detention without conviction is a violation of international law. The British government has a legal obligation to protect him, and they've failed. It's shameful. And it shows the weakness of current Western leadership compared to Trump's decisive action. So, as we wrap up, what's the historical parallel here? Because this feels like we've seen this before. We have been, and it's a dark parallel. In the 1930s, the world watched as Nazi Germany began persecuting Jews. Most nations stayed silent. Most people looked away. And we know how that ended. In the 1990s, we watched genocide unfold in Rwanda. The UN failed to act. Western governments failed to act. 800,000 people were murdered in 100 days. And now in 2025, we're watching a Christian genocide in Nigeria. And once again, most of the world is silent. Except for President Trump. And that's why his intervention is so historically significant. He's refusing to repeat the mistakes of the past. He's saying, not on my watch, not while I have the power to act. And that's what real leadership looks like. It's standing up when it's difficult, when it's politically inconvenient, when others are too afraid or too compromised to act. So what can our listeners do? How can they support this effort? First, spread the word. Share this story. The mainstream media won't cover it, so we have to. Second, contact your representatives. Demand they support Trump's CPC designation. Demand sanctions against Nigerian officials. Demand the release of Nnamdi Kanu. Third, support organizations helping persecuted Christians in Nigeria. They need financial support and prayers. And fourth, pray. Pray for the victims, pray for Nnamdi Kanu, pray for justice. And pray for President Trump, that he continues to have the courage to stand for what's right. Because at the end of the day, this is about more than politics. It's about good versus evil. It's about whether we will stand with the persecuted or be complicit in their destruction. President Trump has shown us the way. Now we must follow. That's exactly right. This is a defining moment. Future generations will ask what we did when Christians were being slaughtered in Nigeria. Let's make sure we can answer that we stood for justice. Well, that's all the time we have today. This has been a deep dive, and we thank you for joining us for this critical discussion. Keep seeking the truth, keep standing for justice, and we'll see you next time. Stay informed, stay engaged, and God bless. Before we go, I think we need to address something important. Our listeners might be wondering, why isn't this story getting more coverage? That's a great question, and the answer is uncomfortable. The mainstream media has a narrative problem. They've spent years promoting a story of religious tolerance and multicultural harmony. The idea that radical Islamic terrorism is systematically targeting Christians doesn't fit that narrative, so they ignore it. They call it a conflict or a crisis, but they refuse to name it for what it is, genocide. And when someone like President Trump does name it, they attack him for being divisive or Islamophobic. It's journalistic malpractice. It's worse than that. It's a moral cowardice. These journalists have a platform, they have resources, they have the ability to shine a light on this atrocity, and they choose not to. They choose their narrative over the truth, and Christians die because of that choice. That's why independent media, podcasts like ours, citizen journalists, are so important. We're filling the gap that the mainstream media has created. We're telling the stories they won't tell. Exactly. And our listeners are part of that. When you share this episode, when you talk about this issue, you become part of the solution. You become the media. You break through the silence. Now, I want to go back to something we touched on earlier, the role of prayer. Because for many of our listeners, they're people of faith. And they might feel powerless. What can prayer actually accomplish? Prayer is powerful. It changes hearts. It changes minds. It changes circumstances. But prayer without action is incomplete. We need to pray for the Christians of Nigeria, absolutely. But we also need to act. We need to support organizations helping them. We need to pressure our governments. We need to be the hands and feet of our prayers. That's beautifully put out, and I think that's the perfect note to end on. This isn't just a political issue or a foreign policy issue. For many of us, it's a spiritual issue. It's about standing with our brothers and sisters in Christ who are facing persecution. It's about being the church, not just in our comfortable pews, but in the hard places and the dangerous places where our faith actually costs something. And President Trump understood that. His statement wasn't just political calculation. It was a recognition that America has a moral obligation to defend religious freedom worldwide. That's what made his intervention so powerful. So to our listeners, thank you for staying with us through this difficult topic. Thank you for caring. Thank you for being willing to hear the truth. We challenge you to do 3 things this week. 1. Share this episode with at least 3 people. 2. Contact your representative and demand action on Nigeria. 3. For the persecuted Christians and for Nnamdi Kanu's release. If everyone listening does those 3 things, we can create real momentum for change. Absolutely. This is how movements start, with informed, engaged citizens who refuse to stay silent. That's you. That's us. That's how we honor the memory of those who have been killed and fight for those who are still in danger. This has been The Deep Dive. We'll continue to follow this story and bring you updates. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and stand for justice.